Emma thought she had found the perfect husband, but after marriage, she found herself trapped between her husband's family, endless expectations, and a relationship where her feelings never seemed to matter. She stayed for her children, until one question from her daughter changed everything. This is Emma's story. Emma was 24 years old when she met Daniel. Looking back years later, she would often wonder if the warning signs had always been there, hidden beneath the excitement of falling in love. But at the time, she saw only what her heart wanted to see. Daniel was charming. He was confident, successful, and seemed to know exactly where he wanted to go in life. When he spoke, people listened. When he smiled, it was difficult not to smile back. For Emma, he felt like the answer to every dream she had carried since childhood. She dreamed of a loving husband, a warm home, children running through the hallway, family dinners filled with laughter. And when Daniel spoke about the future, it sounded exactly like the future she wanted. Their relationship moved quickly. They spent long evenings talking about their dreams and making plans. Daniel often told her she was different from other women. "You have a good heart," he would say. "You'll make an incredible wife one day." Those words meant everything to Emma. She had always been someone who cared deeply about others. Making people happy came naturally to her. She found joy in helping, listening, and giving. Daniel seemed to admire those qualities, at least in the beginning. When Emma met Daniel's family, she was nervous. She wanted them to like her. She wanted them to see how much she loved their son. At first, everything seemed normal. His mother welcomed her warmly. His father asked questions about her job and her family. His sisters laughed and joked with her. Emma left their first family dinner feeling relieved, but little by little things began to change. His mother called often, sometimes every day, sometimes several times a day. At first, Emma thought it was sweet. She assumed Daniel simply came from a close family, but over time she noticed something strange. Daniel's mother always seemed to have an opinion about everything: how Emma dressed, how she cooked, how she organized her time, even how she spoke to Daniel. One afternoon, while helping prepare lunch at his parents' house, Emma overheard his mother speaking to a relative. "A wife should always put her husband's family first," she said. "A good wife supports her husband by serving the people who raised him." Emma pretended not to hear, but the words stayed with her. Later that evening, she mentioned it to Daniel. "I think your mother expects a lot from me." Daniel laughed. "That's because she likes you." Emma smiled politely, but something about his answer didn't feel right. As the months passed, family gatherings became more frequent. Every visit followed the same pattern. The men sat comfortably in the living room. The women prepared food, served meals, and cleaned afterward. Without anyone ever saying it directly, Emma found herself expected to do the same. If she sat down for too long, someone would ask for help. If she tried to relax, another task appeared. And every time she looked around, she noticed something. Nobody seemed to expect Daniel to help. Not once. At first, Emma said nothing. She wanted to avoid conflict. She wanted everyone to get along. Most importantly, she wanted Daniel to be happy. But a quiet discomfort was beginning to grow inside her. One day, after spending nearly an entire afternoon helping Daniel's mother prepare a family gathering, she finally spoke up. "I feel like I'm working every time we visit." Daniel's smile disappeared. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. Sometimes it feels like I'm expected to take care of everyone." Daniel immediately became defensive. "They are my parents." "I know." "They've always treated me well." "I know." "So why are you complaining?" Emma blinked. She wasn't complaining. At least she didn't think she was. She was simply trying to explain how she felt. But before she could continue, Daniel shook his head. "You're being too sensitive." The conversation ended there, and for the first time since they had met, Emma felt something she couldn't quite explain. A small loneliness. A feeling that maybe her feelings mattered less than everyone else's. It was only a tiny crack, barely noticeable, easy to ignore. So she ignored it. She told herself every relationship had challenges. She told herself every family was different. She told herself love required patience. What she didn't know was that this tiny crack would slowly grow over the years, and one day it would become impossible to ignore. 2 years after they met, Emma and Daniel got married. It was a beautiful spring afternoon. The sun shone brightly, the flowers were in bloom, and the church was filled with smiling faces. Friends and family gathered to celebrate what seemed like the beginning of a wonderful life together. Emma walked down the aisle with tears of happiness in her eyes. She looked at Daniel standing at the altar and felt her heart fill with hope. This was the man she loved, the man she trusted, the man she believed would stand beside her through every challenge life might bring. When they exchanged vows, Emma meant every word. She promised loyalty. She promised support. She promised to love him through both good times and difficult times. Daniel made the same promises. As they left the church hand in hand, Emma felt certain that the future would be beautiful. She had no idea that some of the hardest years of her life were waiting ahead. At first, married life felt exciting. They moved into a small house and began building their future together. Emma enjoyed decorating their home. She carefully chose furniture, curtains, and family photographs. She imagined future children running through the hallway. She imagined birthdays, holidays, and years of happy memories. But before long, reality began to look different from her dreams. His mother called almost every day, sometimes several times a day. She wanted updates about everything: what Emma had cooked, what Daniel had eaten, what plans they had made, what purchases they had discussed. At first, Emma tried to be patient. She didn't want conflict. She wanted everyone to get along. But the constant involvement became exhausting. One evening, Emma and Daniel planned a quiet dinner together. It had been a difficult week, and Emma was looking forward to spending time alone with her husband. Just as they sat down at the table, Daniel's phone rang. It was his mother. Daniel answered immediately. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 20. Emma sat quietly while her dinner grew cold. When the call finally ended, Daniel returned to the table. "My parents want us to come over tomorrow." Emma sighed softly. "We already visited them last weekend." "So?" "I thought we could spend the day together." Daniel's expression immediately changed. "What is that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. I just thought we could have one weekend for ourselves." Daniel shook his head. "You always have a problem when it comes to my family." Emma stared at him. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." The atmosphere instantly became tense. The conversation ended, and once again, Emma found herself apologizing just to restore peace. As the months passed, these situations became more frequent. Daniel's parents expected access to every part of their lives. If Emma declined an invitation, his mother felt offended. If Emma spent time with her own parents, questions followed. If Emma suggested spending a holiday differently, arguments began. Gradually, Emma realized something. She wasn't simply marrying Daniel. She had married into a family that expected to remain at the center of every decision. The pressure weighed heavily on her. Still, she tried. She attended family dinners. She helped organize celebrations. She cooked, cleaned, and smiled even when she felt exhausted. But no matter how much she gave, it never seemed enough. Then one day, something happened that changed everything. Emma had spent an entire Saturday helping Daniel's family prepare a large gathering. She cooked for hours, served guests, cleaned dishes, helped organize decorations. By the end of the evening, her feet hurt and her back ached. As she carried another tray into the kitchen, she overheard Daniel's mother speaking to a relative. She still has a lot to learn. Emma stopped. Her heart sank. The relative asked, "What do you mean?" Daniel's mother lowered her voice. "A wife should naturally know how to take care of her husband's family. Sometimes I wonder if her parents taught her properly." The words hit Emma like a slap. She stood frozen for a moment, not because of the criticism itself, but because she had spent the entire day trying to help, trying to be accepted, trying to belong, and still it wasn't enough. That night, during the drive home, Emma remained quiet. Daniel noticed. "What is wrong with you?" Emma hesitated. Then she told him what she had heard. For a moment, she hoped he would defend her. She hoped he would say his mother was wrong. She hoped he would comfort her. Instead, Daniel sighed heavily. "My mother didn't mean anything by it." Emma looked at him. "Daniel, she questioned how I was raised." "You're exaggerating." "I heard her." "Then maybe stop listening to conversations that don't concern you." Emma felt tears burning behind her eyes. "So it's my fault now?" Daniel gripped the steering wheel. "I didn't say that." "You always do this." "Do what?" "You create problems." The car fell silent. Emma stared out the window. The streetlights passed one after another. And for the first time since their wedding, a painful thought crossed her mind. Maybe Daniel would never stand up for her. Maybe she would always stand alone. She quickly pushed the thought away. She still loved him. She still believed things could improve. She still believed marriage required patience. What she didn't understand was that patience and sacrifice are not the same thing. And little by little, she was sacrificing more of herself than she realized. The woman who once spoke freely was becoming quieter. The woman who once felt confident was beginning to doubt herself. And the marriage she had dreamed about was slowly becoming something very different from what she had imagined. Without knowing it, Emma had already started walking down a road that would become increasingly difficult to leave. The first year of marriage taught Emma an important lesson. No matter how hard she tried, she could never satisfy everyone. She had spent countless hours helping Daniel's family. She attended gatherings, she cooked meals, she offered assistance whenever it was needed. She smiled when she felt uncomfortable. She stayed silent when she felt hurt. And still, she often felt judged. One evening, after another long weekend filled with family obligations, Emma sat alone on the back porch of their house. The sun was setting. The neighborhood was quiet. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to think honestly. She felt exhausted, not physically, emotionally. She loved Daniel, she truly did. But she no longer recognized the life they were building. Every decision seemed to involve his family. Every holiday, every weekend, every important conversation. Sometimes she felt as if she were living inside someone else's marriage. When Daniel joined her outside, Emma decided to speak openly. "Can we talk?" Daniel sat down beside her. "About what?" Emma took a deep breath. "I think we need more space." Daniel frowned immediately. "What do you mean?" "I mean space for us. Space to build our own family, our own traditions, our own life." Daniel crossed his arms. "We already have our own life." Emma shook her head gently. "No, Daniel, we don't." His expression hardened. "You are talking about my parents again." "I am talking about us. My parents are part of my life." "I know." "Then what's the problem?" Emma looked down at her hands. "The problem is that sometimes I feel like our marriage comes second. The silence that followed felt heavy. Daniel stood up. I can't believe this. Daniel, no. Every time things are good, you find something to complain about. Emma felt frustration rising inside her. I'm not complaining. I'm trying to tell you how I feel. You always make everything about your feelings. Those words hurt because Emma had spent most of their marriage ignoring her own feelings. But she said nothing. Daniel walked back inside, and once again the conversation ended without a solution. Over the following months, Emma slowly began creating boundaries. She stopped answering every phone call from Daniel's mother. She politely declined some invitations. She spent more time with her own parents. And for the first time in years, she occasionally put her own needs first. The changes were small, but Daniel's family noticed immediately, especially his mother. One afternoon, she called Daniel while he was at work. Emma happened to be in the kitchen when he returned home that evening. His mood was dark. His movements were tense. She knew something was wrong. What happened? Daniel placed his keys on the counter. My mother called. Emma's stomach tightened. Oh. She says you've been avoiding her. Emma sighed softly. I haven't been avoiding her. Then why aren't you answering her calls? Because sometimes she calls 3 or 4 times a day. Daniel stared at her. So now my mother is bothering you? No, Daniel. That's exactly what you're saying. Emma closed her eyes briefly. Every conversation seemed to follow the same pattern. No matter what she said, Daniel twisted her words into something else. Something worse. Something she never intended. I'm simply asking for balance. Daniel laughed bitterly. Balance? The way he said the word made it sound ugly. Yes. You know what I think? Emma remained silent. I think you've never liked my family. The accusation stunned her. That's not true. Really? Really. Then why are you pulling away? Emma looked directly at him. Because I need room to breathe. The words escaped before she could stop them. For a moment, Daniel's face became completely expressionless. Then he turned away. But Emma saw something in his eyes. Resentment. Deep resentment. And from that day forward, things began changing. Slowly. Quietly but unmistakably. Daniel became colder. Less patient. Less affectionate. At first, Emma thought she was imagining it. Maybe he was stressed. Maybe work was difficult. Maybe she was overthinking. But the pattern continued. If she disagreed with him, he became distant. If she expressed an opinion, he criticized it. If she made a decision without consulting him, he acted offended. It felt as though he was punishing her. Not with violence, not with threats, but with emotional distance. The man who once called her beautiful now rarely complimented her. The man who once listened now interrupted her. The man who once made her feel special now made her feel guilty. One night they attended a family dinner at his parents' house. Throughout the evening, Daniel's mother made several comments directed at Emma. Small comments, subtle comments. The kind that sounded harmless to outsiders, but carried hidden meaning. Some women understand family better than others. Marriage requires sacrifice. A wife should never come between a son and his parents. Each sentence felt carefully aimed. Emma smiled politely and remained quiet. On the drive home, she expected Daniel to acknowledge what had happened. He didn't. Instead, he surprised her. You embarrassed my mother tonight. Emma turned toward him. What? You barely spoke. I was tired. She noticed. Emma stared at him in disbelief. So now being tired is disrespectful? Daniel gripped the steering wheel. You always have an excuse. Emma felt tears forming, not because of the argument, but because she finally understood something. Daniel wasn't trying to understand her. He was defending a version of reality where she was always wrong, no matter what happened, no matter how hard she tried. The blame always found its way back to her. That realization broke something inside her. Not all at once, not dramatically, just a small crack, a tiny fracture in the hope she had carried for years. Still, she stayed. She told herself marriage was difficult. She told herself every couple struggled. She told herself things would eventually improve. But deep inside, a quiet sadness was beginning to settle in her heart. A sadness she could not explain. A sadness that grew every time she felt unheard. Every time she felt blamed. Every time she felt alone while sitting beside the man she loved. What Emma didn't know was that this was only the beginning. The distance she had created from Daniel's family had awakened something inside him. A bitterness he refused to confront. A resentment he refused to release. And over the years, that resentment would slowly transform into something much more painful. Something that would affect every part of their marriage, including the children who had not yet been born. When Emma discovered she was pregnant with their first child, she cried tears of happiness. She still remembered the moment clearly. The small bathroom, the early morning sunlight coming through the window, the pregnancy test trembling in her hands, and the overwhelming feeling that her life was about to change forever. She couldn't wait to tell Daniel. When he came home from work that evening, she greeted him at the door with a smile she couldn't hide. Daniel looked confused. What happened? Emma handed him the test. For a moment, he stared at it silently. Then a smile slowly appeared on his face. "You're serious?" Emma nodded. Daniel laughed and pulled her into his arms. "We're having a baby." For the first time in months, Emma felt hopeful. She convinced herself that this was exactly what they needed. A new beginning, a fresh chapter, a reason to focus on their future instead of old conflicts. During the pregnancy, Daniel seemed different. He attended medical appointments. He touched Emma's growing belly. He talked excitedly about becoming a father. Whenever the baby kicked, he smiled like a little boy. Seeing him like that made Emma believe things were finally improving. For a while, she allowed herself to dream again. 9 months later, their daughter was born. They named her Lily. The moment Emma held her for the first time, the world seemed to stop. Lily was tiny, perfect, beautiful. Emma had never experienced a love so powerful. As she looked at her daughter, she made a silent promise. "I will always protect you, no matter what, no matter how difficult life becomes." Daniel was emotional too. He proudly showed pictures of Lily to everyone. His parents visited often. Friends brought gifts. Family members celebrated. For a brief period, their home felt happy. But babies grow, and reality returns. The sleepless nights began. The exhaustion began. The endless responsibilities began. Emma quickly found herself carrying most of the work. She woke up several times each night, fed Lily, changed diapers, rocked her back to sleep, then woke up early to continue the day. Some mornings she felt so tired she could barely stand. But she kept going because she was a mother and because Lily depended on her. Daniel helped at first, but as weeks turned into months, his patience faded. One night, Lily had been crying for nearly an hour. Emma was walking back and forth across the bedroom trying to calm her. Daniel suddenly sat up in bed. "For God's sake, make her stop." Emma looked at him. "She's a baby." "I have work tomorrow." Emma felt frustration rise inside her. "So do I." Daniel laughed coldly. "No, you stay home." The words hurt more than he realized, or maybe exactly as much as he intended. Emma looked down at Lily. She said nothing, because arguing would only make things worse. That became her pattern. Silence, endurance, patience. Years later, she would realize how much of herself she sacrificed during those years. When Lily was 3 years old, Emma became pregnant again, this time with a boy, Noah. The second pregnancy was harder. Emma was already exhausted caring for a toddler. Daniel was becoming increasingly critical, and the support she once hoped for rarely appeared. Still, when Noah was born, Emma felt her heart expand once again. She loved both children equally, completely, unconditionally. The house became louder, busier, messier, but also fuller of life. For a while, the children became the center of everything, and Emma was happy to make them her priority. Several years later, their youngest daughter Ava arrived. 3 children. 3 little souls she would gladly give her life for. By then, however, something had changed in her marriage. The distance between Emma and Daniel had grown. Not dramatically, not overnight, but slowly. Like a crack spreading through glass. Daniel's criticism had become a normal part of daily life. If dinner was late, he complained. If the children made too much noise, he blamed Emma. If the house wasn't perfectly organized, he found fault. No matter how hard she worked, there was always something wrong, always something missing, always another reason for criticism. One evening, Emma spent nearly 2 hours preparing dinner. The children were hungry. Noah had been difficult all afternoon. Ava was sick. Lily needed help with homework. Emma had barely sat down all day. Finally, dinner was ready. Everyone gathered around the table. Daniel took one bite, then another. Suddenly, he put down his fork. "The chicken is dry." Emma stared at him. For a moment, she thought he was joking. He wasn't. "The chicken is dry," he repeated. The children became silent. Emma looked around the table. Hours of work, hours of effort. And that was the only thing he noticed. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Daniel shook his head. "You never pay attention." Emma lowered her eyes. The familiar shame returned. Not because of the chicken, but because she felt like nothing she did mattered. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Emma sat alone in the kitchen. The house was finally quiet. The dishes were washed. The laundry was folded. The toys were put away. Everyone else's needs had been met. Everyone gathered around the table. Daniel took one bite, then another. Suddenly, he put down his fork. "The chicken is dry." Emma stared at him. For a moment, she thought he was joking. He wasn't. "The chicken is dry," he repeated. The children became silent. Emma looked around the table. Hours of work, hours of effort. And that was the only thing he noticed. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Daniel shook his head. "You never pay attention." Emma lowered her eyes. The familiar shame returned. Not because of the chicken, but because she felt like nothing she did mattered. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Emma sat alone in the kitchen. The house was finally quiet. The dishes were washed. The laundry was folded. The toys were put away. Everyone else's needs had been met. For the first time all day, she was alone. And suddenly, tears filled her eyes. She wasn't crying because of the chicken. She wasn't crying because of one comment. She was crying because she felt invisible. She gave everything, every day, every hour, every piece of herself. And still she felt unseen, unappreciated, unloved. The sound of a small voice interrupted her thoughts. "Mom?" Emma quickly wiped her tears. Lily stood at the kitchen entrance. She was 7 years old enough to notice things. "Why are you crying?" Emma forced a smile. I'm okay, sweetheart. Lily walked closer. She wrapped her small arms around her mother's waist. Emma held her tightly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lily whispered something that stayed with Emma forever. You're the best mom in the world. Emma closed her eyes and cried even harder, because those simple words meant more to her than Lily could possibly understand. They were words she desperately needed to hear. Words she rarely heard from the one person who should have been saying them. As Emma sat there holding her daughter, she realized something important. Her children were becoming her entire world, her source of strength, her source of comfort, her reason to keep going. And although she didn't know it yet, they would also become the reason she would one day find the courage to change her life. Because a mother's love can endure incredible pain. But eventually, every mother must ask herself one difficult question. Am I teaching my children how to live? Or am I teaching them how to suffer? The years passed quietly. Not the kind of quiet that brings peace. The kind of quiet that slowly erases a person. From the outside, Emma's life looked complete. She had a husband, 3 beautiful children, a comfortable home, family vacations, birthday parties, school concerts, family photos hanging on the walls. To anyone looking in from the outside, she seemed fortunate. People often told her so. You have such a beautiful family. Your children are wonderful. You must be proud. Emma always smiled, and she was proud. Proud of her children, proud of the home she'd built, proud of the countless sacrifices she had made. But nobody saw the woman behind all that effort. Nobody saw how tired she had become. Every morning, Emma woke up before everyone else. She prepared breakfast, packed lunches, made sure school bags were ready, checked homework, found missing shoes, cleaned the kitchen, started laundry. Then came groceries, appointments, cooking, cleaning, and 100 other responsibilities that nobody seemed to notice. Her days never stopped. By the time evening arrived, she often felt exhausted. Yet there was never a moment to rest because someone always needed something, and Emma always answered. That was who she had become. The person everyone relied on, the person who solved problems, the person who carried the family. Yet strangely, the more she gave, the less visible she became. Daniel certainly didn't seem to notice. Years earlier, he used to compliment her. He used to thank her. He used to tell her she was beautiful. Those moments had disappeared. Now, most conversations focused on mistakes. Small mistakes, meaningless mistakes, but to Daniel, they seemed enormous. One evening, Emma spent nearly an hour helping Noah complete a school project. Ava had a fever. Lily needed help studying for an exam. Dinner was running late. By the time everyone sat at the table, Emma was mentally exhausted. Daniel looked at the clock. We're eating late again. Emma took a slow breath. Ava wasn't feeling well. Daniel shrugged. There's always an excuse. The children became quiet. Emma lowered her eyes to her plate. She didn't respond. There was no point. Defending herself only led to arguments, and arguments always ended the same way, with Daniel angry and Emma feeling guilty. Even when she wasn't responsible, that was one of the things that hurt the most, the constant blame. If the children forgot something at school, Emma should have remembered. If a bill arrived unexpectedly, Emma should have anticipated it. If Daniel had a difficult day at work, somehow Emma became responsible for that too. Over time, she began carrying responsibility for everything, not because it was hers, but because it was easier than fighting. The arguments had become exhausting. Daniel rarely shouted at first. Instead, he used something far more effective: disappointment, sarcasm, criticism, the small comments that slowly wear a person down. Comments that seem insignificant when heard individually but become heavy when repeated every day. You forgot again? Why don't you think ahead? You always make things harder than they need to be. Sometimes I wonder what you do all day. Those words stayed with Emma long after they were spoken. At first she ignored them, then she questioned them. Eventually she began believing some of them. That frightened her, because Emma had once been confident. Before Daniel, she trusted herself. She made decisions without second-guessing every detail. Now she questioned everything. Before making a choice, she wondered what Daniel would think. Before speaking, she considered whether it might start an argument. Before buying something, she worried he might criticize it. Without realizing it, she had slowly stopped trusting herself. One Saturday afternoon, Sarah visited. The children were playing in the backyard while Emma prepared coffee. Sarah watched her friend carefully. "You seem distracted." Emma smiled. "I'm fine." Sarah laughed softly. "You always say that." Emma sat down. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Sarah asked a question Emma wasn't expecting. "When was the last time you did something for yourself?" Emma frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean something just for you." Emma thought for a moment, then another. She couldn't answer. Sarah waited. Still nothing. The silence itself became the answer. Sarah looked sad. "Emma, that's not normal." Emma looked away. "I don't have time." Sarah shook her head gently. "No, you've convinced yourself you don't deserve time." Those words hit harder than Emma expected, because somewhere deep inside she knew they were true. She couldn't remember the last time she had thought about her own happiness. Everything revolved around other people: the children, Daniel, the house, the family, everyone except her. That evening, after Sarah left, Emma sat quietly in the living room. The children were asleep upstairs. The television was on, but she wasn't watching it. She was thinking about Sarah's question. When was the last time she had done something for herself? The answer disturbed her. She honestly didn't know. Years had passed, entire years. And somewhere along the way, Emma had stopped being a person. She had become a role: a wife, a mother, a caretaker, a problem solver. Everything for everyone, yet somehow nothing for herself. The realization made her heart ache. Later that night, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror. She studied her reflection. The woman staring back looked older, not because of age, because of weight. The invisible weight she carried every day. The weight of responsibility, the weight of criticism, the weight of constantly trying to be enough. And suddenly, a frightening thought crossed her mind. What if no matter how hard she tried, she would never be enough for Daniel? The thought lingered. She wanted to reject it, but she couldn't, because deep down she already knew the answer. No matter how much she gave, no matter how hard she worked, no matter how many sacrifices she made, Daniel always found something missing, something wrong, something to criticize. For years, Emma had been trying to earn appreciation, trying to earn peace, trying to earn love. But love should never have to be earned, and yet she spent every day working for it. That night, as she turned off the bathroom light, Emma felt a sadness she could no longer ignore. For years, she had focused on everyone else's needs. For years, she had carried everyone else's burdens. But somewhere along the way, she had lost sight of herself. And perhaps the most painful part of all was realizing that nobody seemed to notice. Not even the man she had once believed would cherish her forever. Emma had become invisible. And the worst part was that she was beginning to feel invisible to herself. Sarah had watched Emma change over the years. She remembered the young woman who laughed easily, spoke confidently, and filled every room with warmth. That woman still existed somewhere inside Emma, but lately Sarah could barely see her. One afternoon, the two friends met at a small cafe near the park. It had become one of the few places where Emma felt she could breathe. For a while, they talked about ordinary things: the children, school, work, the weather. But Sarah knew her friend too well. She could see the sadness hidden behind Emma's smile. Finally, she asked the question she had been holding back. "Are you happy, Emma?" Emma looked down at her coffee. The question seemed simple, yet she couldn't answer it. After a long silence, she whispered, "I don't know anymore." Sarah's heart sank. Years ago, Emma would have answered immediately. Now she wasn't even sure. "You know," Sarah said gently, "I don't think anyone should spend their life feeling this unhappy." Emma sighed. "It's not that simple." "I know. There are the children." Sarah nodded. "The children are exactly why I'm worried." Emma looked up. "What do you mean?" Sarah hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I know you stay because you love them. I know you want them to grow up with both parents." "I do. But what are they learning?" Emma frowned. Sarah continued softly. "They see everything, Emma. They're still young. They hear the arguments." Emma remained silent. "They see how Daniel talks to you." The words hung heavily between them. For a moment, Emma couldn't respond, because deep down she knew Sarah was right. The children heard more than she wanted to believe. They noticed more than she wanted to admit. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I'm not telling you what to do." "I know. But I don't want you to lose yourself." Emma felt tears forming in her eyes. "Sometimes I think I've already lost myself." Sarah shook her head immediately. "No?" Her voice was firm. "No, Emma, you're still there. You're just tired. You've spent so many years taking care of everyone else that you've forgotten how to take care of yourself." Emma wiped a tear from her cheek. "Sometimes I wonder if things will ever change." Sarah looked at her carefully. "And if they don't?" Emma had no answer. The question stayed with her for the rest of the day. And later that evening, as she sat quietly watching her children play in the living room, she found herself wondering the same thing. What if nothing ever changed? What if 10 years passed? What if 20 years passed? Would she still be sitting in the same house carrying the same sadness? The thought frightened her, because for the first time, she realized she wasn't only afraid of leaving, she was also afraid of staying. And that realization marked the beginning of something new. Not a decision. Not yet. But a question she could no longer ignore. A question that would slowly change the way she saw her life and the way she saw herself. Emma's parents had noticed the changes long before she admitted them. A mother always knows when her child is hurting, and a father always notices when his daughter's smile no longer reaches her eyes. For years, Emma had tried to hide her pain. Whenever she visited her parents, she spoke about the children, school activities, and daily life. She avoided talking about her marriage. But some things cannot stay hidden forever. Her mother noticed how tired she looked. Her father noticed how careful she had become when choosing her words. And both of them noticed something else. Emma no longer laughed the way she used to. One Sunday afternoon, Emma brought the children to visit her parents. Daniel had stayed home. The children were playing in the garden while Emma helped her mother prepare lunch. For a while, everything felt peaceful. Then her mother gently asked, "How are things between you and Daniel?" Emma froze. She kept her eyes on the vegetables she was cutting. "We're fine." Her mother remained silent. Then she softly placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. "My daughter, you don't have to pretend with me." Those simple words broke something inside her. For years, Emma had carried her struggles alone. Now tears filled her eyes. Her mother immediately pulled her into a hug. Emma tried to stay strong, but she couldn't. The tears came, quiet at first, then all at once. Her father entered the kitchen a few moments later. When he saw his daughter crying, his face changed. He sat beside her without saying a word. For a moment, the room was silent. Then Emma finally spoke. "I don't know what happened." Her voice trembled. "I keep trying. I keep giving everything I have. But it never seems enough." Her father looked down. Those words hurt him deeply, because he had spent years watching his daughter slowly lose her confidence. He had seen the sadness growing behind her smile, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "You deserve better than this," he said quietly. Emma lowered her head. "I stay because of the children." Her mother nodded slowly. "We know. And they love their father." "We know that too." Nobody argued with her. Nobody pressured her. Her parents understood how difficult her situation was, but they also understood something Emma wasn't ready to face. Their daughter was suffering, and every year that suffering seemed to grow heavier. Before she left that evening, her father walked her to the car. The children were already inside. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he looked at her and said something she would never forget. "No matter what happens, you always have a home with us." Emma felt tears return to her eyes. She hugged him tightly. As she drove away, she looked in the rearview mirror and saw her parents standing together in the driveway, watching, worrying, waiting, wanting to help but unable to make the decision for her. And for the first time, Emma realized she wasn't the only one carrying this pain. The people who loved her were carrying it too. They were suffering simply because they hated seeing her suffer. That realization stayed with her all the way home. And that night, as she tucked her children into bed, she found herself wondering something she had avoided for years. How much longer could everyone continue living this way? Because while she had become used to carrying the burden was beginning to affect everyone around her, even the people who loved her most. As the years passed, Emma began noticing something she had tried to ignore for a long time. Daniel had never truly accepted the distance she created between herself and his family. He rarely spoke about it directly anymore, but the resentment remained. It appeared in small ways: cold looks, sharp comments, long silences. Whenever his mother complained about Emma, Daniel never defended her. Sometimes he didn't say anything at all, and somehow his silence hurt more than words. One evening, after a family gathering, Daniel drove home without speaking. Emma could feel the tension in the car. Finally, she asked, "What's wrong?" Daniel kept his eyes on the road. "Nothing." Emma knew that answer. It never meant nothing. A few minutes later, he spoke. "My mother thinks you've changed." Emma sighed quietly. "Your mother has thought that for years." "Maybe she's right." Emma turned toward him. "What does that mean?" Daniel's voice was calm, but cold. "It means you stopped caring about my family a long time ago." Emma felt frustration rise inside her. "I never stopped caring. I just stopped letting them control my life." The moment the words left her mouth, she regretted them. Daniel's jaw tightened. "There you go again." "Again what?" "Making yourself the victim." Emma stared out the window. The conversation was going exactly where it always went. No matter what happened, she became the problem. No matter how respectfully she spoke, she was accused of attacking his family. By the time they arrived home, neither of them spoke. The silence lasted for days. Daniel wasn't shouting. He wasn't arguing. Instead, he acted as if Emma barely existed. He answered questions with one-word responses, ignored her attempts at conversation, spent more time on his phone, more time outside the house. It felt like punishment, and perhaps that was exactly what it was. Years earlier, Daniel had been angry. Now he had become distant, and somehow the distance hurt just as much. One night, Emma sat alone in the living room after the children had gone to bed. The house was quiet. For a long time, she stared at the family photographs on the wall. Pictures of birthdays, vacations, Christmas mornings. To anyone else, they looked like memories of a happy family. But Emma knew the truth. A picture could capture a smile. It couldn't capture loneliness. It couldn't capture years of criticism. It couldn't capture how invisible she often felt. As she looked at those photographs, one painful realization settled into her heart. Daniel wasn't trying to understand her. He was still punishing her for becoming her own person, for setting boundaries, for refusing to live entirely according to his family's expectations. And for the first time, Emma stopped asking herself what she had done wrong. Instead, she found herself asking a different question. What if she had never been the problem at all? It was a small thought, but it was powerful, and once it appeared, it refused to disappear. After her conversation with Sarah and the visit to her parents, something changed inside Emma. Her life looked exactly the same. She still woke up early. She still prepared meals. She still took care of the children. She still lived under the same roof as Daniel. But her thoughts were different. For years, she had spent her energy asking herself the same questions. What could she do better? How could she avoid arguments? How could she make Daniel happier? How could she keep the family together? Now a new question had appeared, and it refused to leave her mind. What if she wasn't the problem? At first, she pushed the thought away. It felt selfish, almost wrong. Daniel had spent years convincing her that most of their problems were somehow her fault. She had believed it for so long that questioning it felt strange. But once the question entered her mind, she began noticing things she had ignored before. Whenever there was a disagreement, Daniel blamed her. Whenever he was unhappy, she became the target. Whenever something went wrong, he rarely accepted responsibility, and somehow she was always the one apologizing. One evening, Daniel came home from work in a bad mood. The children were doing homework at the kitchen table. Emma was preparing dinner. Without saying hello, Daniel walked into the kitchen. Why is the house so noisy? Emma looked around. The children were barely speaking. Noah is studying. Daniel shook his head. There is always chaos in this house. Emma felt the familiar urge to apologize. Then she stopped herself. For the first time in years, she simply remained silent. Daniel looked at her. What? Nothing. The answer surprised even her. Daniel waited for an argument, for an explanation, for an apology. None came. He walked away, annoyed. Emma stood there for a moment. Her heart was racing. It seemed like such a small thing, yet it felt important. For once, she had not accepted blame for something that wasn't her fault. Later that night, after everyone was asleep, Emma sat alone in the living room. The house was quiet. She thought about the woman she had been before meeting Daniel. The woman who trusted herself. The woman who had dreams beyond simply surviving each day. She missed that woman. More than anything, she wanted to find her again. Emma wasn't thinking about divorce. She wasn't making plans to leave. Not yet. But for the first time in many years, she was beginning to see her life differently. She was beginning to understand that love should not constantly make a person feel small. And the question that had appeared in her mind continued to grow stronger. What if she deserved better than this? For years, Emma had been afraid of that question. Now she was beginning to listen to it. For many years, Emma believed she was protecting her children. That belief had become the reason she stayed. Whenever she thought about leaving, she imagined the pain it might cause them. She imagined birthdays spent between two homes, holiday schedules, and questions she didn't know how to answer. Every time she convinced herself that keeping the family together was the right choice. But recently, something had started to trouble her. The children were getting older and they were paying attention, much more than she had realized. One evening, Emma and Daniel were arguing in the kitchen. The disagreement wasn't important. Most of their arguments never were. Daniel had come home frustrated from work. Emma had asked a simple question. Somehow it turned into criticism, then blame, and then another argument. As usual, Daniel's voice grew louder. Emma tried to stay calm because she didn't want the children to hear, but it was already too late. When the argument ended, Emma walked into the living room. Lily was sitting quietly on the couch. Noah was pretending to watch television. Ava was unusually silent. The room felt different, heavy. Emma immediately understood. They had heard everything. Again. That night, after tucking the children into bed, Emma sat alone in the hallway. Her heart felt heavy. She thought about all the arguments over the years, all the criticism and all the tension. She had always believed that children were too young to understand, but children understand more than adults often realize. They may not understand every word, but they understand emotions. They understand fear. They understand sadness. And they understand when someone they love is hurting. The next morning, Emma was helping Ava get ready for school. As she brushed her daughter's hair, Ava looked at her in the mirror. "Mom?" "Yes, sweetheart." Ava hesitated. Then she asked quietly, "Why does Dad get angry at you so much?" Emma froze. The question broke her heart, not because Ava had asked it, but because it confirmed what Emma had been afraid to admit. The children saw everything. Emma forced a small smile. "Sometimes adults disagree." Ava nodded slowly, but Emma knew her answer wasn't enough. Later that day, while the house was empty, Emma sat alone at the kitchen table. For a long time, she stared at nothing. The silence around her felt different now. The question kept replaying in her mind. Why does Dad get angry at you so much? For years, Emma had worried about what separation might do to her children. But for the first time, she began wondering something else. What was staying doing to them? That question frightened her more than anything she had faced before, because once she allowed herself to ask it, she couldn't stop. The children were watching. They always had been. And perhaps they were seeing the truth long before she was ready to face it herself. Every person has a limit, a moment when the weight becomes too heavy to carry. For years, Emma had endured criticism, blame, and disappointment. She had convinced herself she could handle it. For the children, for the family, for the hope that things might one day improve. But one evening, something changed. It wasn't a major argument. It wasn't the worst thing Daniel had ever said. In fact, it began like many other nights. Daniel came home irritated. Dinner wasn't ready as quickly as he wanted. The children were talking loudly. The house was busy. Normal family life. Yet Daniel immediately began complaining. His voice grew louder. His words became sharper. As Emma listened, she felt something unusual. Not sadness, not guilt, not fear. Exhaustion. A deep exhaustion that reached her soul. For years, she had tried to fix everything, tried to keep the peace, tried to make everyone happy. And suddenly she realized she was tired of carrying a burden that wasn't hers alone. Daniel continued speaking, but for the first time, Emma wasn't really listening. Instead, she looked around the room, at Lily, at Noah, at Ava. The children were silent, watching, waiting for the argument to end, waiting for the tension to pass. And in that moment, Emma saw something that broke her heart. This wasn't normal to them anymore. It was familiar. The arguments, the criticism, the uncomfortable silence. It had become part of their lives, part of their childhood. That realization hit harder than anything Daniel could have said. Later that night, after everyone was asleep, Emma sat alone in the dark. She thought about the woman she had once been, the dreams she had carried, the happiness she had imagined. And for the first time in many years, she admitted something to herself. She could not continue living this way forever. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't have a plan, but deep inside, something had shifted. The woman who had spent years enduring was beginning to wake up. And once a person begins to see the truth clearly, it becomes impossible to pretend they don't see it. Emma had reached her breaking point. The question was no longer whether something needed to change. The question was when. A few days after the argument, Emma was helping Lily with her homework. The house was quiet, and for a moment, everything felt normal. Then Lily put down her pencil and looked at her mother. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." Lily hesitated before speaking softly. "Why do you let Dad talk to you like that?" Emma felt her heart stop. She didn't know what to say. Then Lily continued. "If someone talked to me that way one day, should I stay?" Tears filled Emma's eyes. For years she had stayed because she believed she was protecting her children. She had convinced herself that keeping the family together was the best thing she could do for them. Every sacrifice, every painful conversation, every silent tear had been justified in her mind by the belief that her children needed both parents under the same roof. But now, sitting beside her daughter, she realized something she had never fully understood before. Her children were not only watching her life, they were learning from it. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. Lily's question echoed in her mind again and again. If someone talked to me that way one day, should I stay? The words followed her through the darkness. For the first time, she saw her marriage through her daughter's eyes. She saw the arguments, the criticism, the silence, the sadness she had tried so hard to hide. And she understood something that changed her forever. Her children needed more than a family that stayed together. They needed an example of self-respect. They needed to learn what healthy love looked like. They needed to know that kindness, respect, and dignity mattered. As Emma lay awake staring at the ceiling, she realized that the question she had been avoiding for years could no longer be ignored. The future she wanted for her children was not the life they were learning from every day. And for the first time, the possibility of change no longer felt like a threat. It felt like a responsibility. The following weeks brought small changes. Nothing dramatic. Nothing anyone else would notice. But Emma noticed. She stopped apologizing for things that weren't her fault. She stopped explaining herself endlessly. She stopped carrying responsibility for Daniel's bad moods. Whenever he criticized her unfairly, she remained calm. Whenever he blamed her for everything, she no longer accepted it automatically. At first, Daniel seemed confused, then irritated, because Emma was changing, not loudly, not aggressively, quietly. There were no big confrontations, no dramatic speeches, and no sudden decisions. Instead, the change happened in small moments. Moments when she chose not to defend herself against unfair accusations. Moments when she refused to carry guilt that didn't belong to her. Moments when she reminded herself that another person's anger was not automatically her responsibility. The biggest change happened inside her. For years, Emma had placed everyone else's needs before her own. She had listened to everyone else's opinions while ignoring her own voice. She had spent so much time trying to keep peace around her that she had forgotten she deserved peace too. Now, little by little, she was beginning to remember. For the first time in years, she began believing that her feelings mattered, her opinions mattered, her happiness mattered. The belief was still fragile, like a small flame protected from the wind. But it was there, and every day it grew a little stronger. Emma wasn't free yet. Her circumstances had not changed. Her marriage was still difficult. Her future was still uncertain. But something important had happened. She had taken the first step, the step that happens long before any visible change, the step that begins in the heart and mind. And that small belief, the belief that she deserved respect, kindness, and happiness, felt more powerful than she could have imagined. For the first time in a very long time, Emma felt something she had almost forgotten: hope, and that hope felt like freedom. One evening, Emma sat alone after everyone had gone to bed. The house was quiet. For the first time all day, there was no one asking for her attention, no responsibilities waiting to be handled, and no expectations to meet. She sat in the darkness and thought about the years behind her, the sacrifices, the tears, the loneliness, the endless hope that Daniel would one day become the man she had fallen in love with. For so long, she had held on to that hope. She had convinced herself that if she was patient enough, understanding enough, and strong enough, things would eventually change. But year after year, she found herself waiting for a different future while living the same painful reality. As she reflected on everything she had endured, a painful truth finally became impossible to ignore. She could not spend the rest of her life waiting for someone else to change. She could not build her happiness on promises that had never been fulfilled. She could not continue sacrificing herself for a version of her marriage that existed only in her hopes. The realization hurt because it meant letting go of the future she had imagined for so many years. Yet at the same time, it brought an unexpected sense of clarity. For years, Emma had chosen fear: fear of separation, fear of judgment, fear of disappointing others, fear of the unknown. Those fears had kept her standing still even when her heart was telling her that something needed to change. But now she felt something different. She felt tired of being afraid. She felt tired of shrinking herself to make life easier for everyone else. She felt tired of believing that her own happiness mattered less than everyone else's. That night, Emma made no dramatic announcements. She didn't tell anyone about her decision. She simply made a quiet promise to herself. She would stop abandoning her own needs. She would stop measuring her worth through someone else's approval. She would stop waiting for permission to be happy. For the first time in many years, she chose herself. She chose peace. She chose self-respect. And although the future still frightened her, she felt stronger than she had felt in a very long time. The road ahead remained uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like a road that belonged to her. The decision was not easy. It came after many conversations, many tears, and many sleepless nights. Emma did not wake up one morning and suddenly decide to change her life. The decision grew slowly, built from years of disappointment, loneliness, and quiet reflection. But eventually she chose a different path. Not because she hated Daniel, not because she wanted revenge, but because she wanted peace. She wanted a life where she no longer felt afraid to speak, where she no longer carried the weight of constant criticism, and where she could finally breathe without feeling responsible for everyone else's unhappiness. The separation was difficult for everyone. The children had questions. There were painful moments, moments of doubt, and moments when Emma wondered if she had done the right thing. Some days were harder than others. There were times when she missed the familiar routines of her old life, even the parts that had hurt her. Change is rarely easy, even when it is necessary. But slowly, something beautiful began to happen. The house became quieter. The tension that had once filled every room began to disappear. Laughter returned. The children smiled more. And Emma smiled more too. For the first time in many years, she no longer woke up feeling anxious. She no longer spent her days trying to avoid criticism or prevent arguments before they started. She no longer felt invisible. Instead, she began rediscovering parts of herself she thought she had lost forever. She laughed more easily. She made decisions without fear. She started believing in her own voice again. The woman who had spent so many years surviving was finally learning how to live. One afternoon, while watching her children play in the backyard, Emma realized something important. The life she had feared for so many years was not the end. It was a beginning. Lily, Noah, and Ava were happy. They were growing up in a home filled with respect instead of fear, calm instead of tension, and honesty instead of silence. As she watched them run across the grass, laughing together beneath the afternoon sun, Emma felt a peace she had not experienced in a very long time. Her journey had taught her an important lesson. Love should never require someone to lose themselves. Marriage should never demand constant suffering. Staying is not always the bravest choice. Sometimes the bravest choice is walking toward a better future, even when the road ahead is uncertain. As the sun slowly began to set, Emma looked at her children and smiled. For the first time in many years, her heart felt light. The future was still unwritten. Challenges would still come. Life would never be perfect. But the road ahead belonged to her. And for the first time in a very long time, that was enough.